In early 2022, I decided to take a solo trip through parts of New Mexico and Arizona. I had been burnt out from work and thought a few days in the open desert would help clear my head. I planned it carefully, mapped out my route, stocked up on supplies, and even rented a rugged 4x4 SUV instead of taking my usual sedan. The first 2 days went smoothly. I camped at national parks, visited a few small desert towns, and spent hours driving on empty roads with nothing around for miles except scrub brush and endless sky. It was the kind of isolation I had been craving. On the third day, I set out early, planning to cut across a lesser-known route, a long winding road that my map showed would take me past a dry riverbed and eventually connect back to the highway after about 80 miles. It wasn't an official highway, just a series of old access roads mostly used by locals. About an hour in, I realized how remote this place really was. There were no buildings, no cell towers, no cars, not even old telephone poles. Just empty desert stretching to the horizon. The road thinning into a cracked line barely wider than my SUV. Still, I wasn't worried. I had extra water, a backup battery, even a paper map. I figured as long as I stayed on the road, I'd be fine. Around noon, with the sun high and relentless, I spotted something odd up ahead. A white pickup truck, pulled off the side of the road. It looked old, dusty, but not abandoned. There were fresh tire marks around it. As I got closer, I noticed that the truck's hood was popped open and someone was bent over it, rummaging inside. For a split second, I thought about stopping to see if they needed help, but something about the scene felt wrong. The guy wasn't dressed like someone who had broken down. No tools around him, no urgency in how he moved. He kept glancing up the road, like he was waiting for something. I slowed but stayed in the middle of the road, inching forward carefully. As I passed, I caught a better glimpse of him. Late 30s or early 40s, sun-weathered skin, wearing a dirty sleeveless shirt and jeans. His truck didn't even have plates, just a blank metal frame where they should have been. He stared at me as I drove by, not waving, not calling out, just watching. I didn't stop. About 10 minutes later, my side mirror caught a glint of sunlight, something moving fast behind me. I looked closer and realized the pickup was coming down the road, closing the distance between us. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but every instinct I had screamed that something wasn't right. I pushed the gas harder, trying not to look obvious. But the road was rough, and my SUV wasn't meant for high-speed chases. Within minutes, the truck was tailing me, keeping just far enough back that I couldn't see inside clearly. No other cars, no exits. Just this endless straight road and a truck that shouldn't have been running if its engine had really been broken. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he fixed the issue and was just heading the same way. Then he accelerated, closed the gap between us until he was practically riding my bumper. I tapped the brakes lightly. Not enough to cause a wreck, just enough to signal him to back off. Instead, he jerked his truck to the side, swerving onto the dirt shoulder and briefly pulling up alongside me. I caught a glimpse of 2 people in the truck now, the driver and someone else crouching low in the passenger seat, like they were trying to stay out of view. That was the moment it went from unsettling to terrifying. There was no doubt now. They were following me. I floored the accelerator, the SUV bucking and jolting over potholes as I tried to put as much distance between us as possible. But the truck was faster, or maybe the driver just knew the terrain better. Every time the road curved, they cut across the desert, closing the distance again. I kept checking the mirror, hoping, praying I'd spot a town, gas station, anything. Nothing but empty desert. About 15 miles later, I spotted a fork in the road. No signs, no markers, just one branch veering left and another to the right. In a split-second decision, I took the left, hoping to lose them. The road narrowed even further, almost disappearing into the sand in places. The truck hesitated at the fork, then roared after me. I was running out of options. That's when I saw it. A cluster of low hills off the side of the road, dotted with boulders. Not much, but enough cover to maybe hide behind. I yanked the wheel hard, bouncing off the road and plowing through dry brush toward the hills. Dust kicked up around me, blinding, choking. I couldn't tell if the truck was still following. I drove until I reached a gap between two large rocks, pulled in, and killed the engine. Heart hammering in my chest, I waited. The seconds dragged by. Eventually, through the shimmering heat, I saw the truck roar past on the road, speeding down the trail without slowing. They hadn't seen me turn off. I stayed there for what felt like an hour, not daring to move. The sun dropped lower, turning the desert gold and casting long, sharp shadows across the rocks. When I finally thought it was safe, I turned the engine back on, and nothing happened. The SUV sputtered weakly, then died. Somewhere during my mad dash across the desert, I must have blown something. Panic surged again, but I forced myself to think. I had supplies. I had water. If I stayed put, someone would eventually find me. It might take a day, maybe longer, but it was better than driving blindly and risking running into those men again. As the sky darkened and the desert air turned cold, I pulled a blanket from the back seat, locked the doors and tried to sleep. I kept jolting awake at every sound. The skitter of insects across the windshield, the distant howl of the wind through the rocks. Every time, I half expected to see headlights cresting over the hills. But the night passed without incident. At dawn, I hiked back toward the main road. It took nearly 3 hours under the rising sun. My throat was dry, my legs aching, but I kept going. Eventually, I reached the fork again and found a highway patrol cruiser pulled over, its lights flashing faintly in the morning light. The officer was checking something in the dirt. Deep tire tracks, gouged into the sand. I stumbled toward him, waving my arms, and he rushed over. After giving me water and making sure I wasn't injured, he listened as I tried to explain what had happened. His face turned grim when I mentioned the pickup. Apparently, there had been a string of disappearances over the past year along those back roads. Travelers, hikers, solo drivers who were never found. Locals whispered about organized gangs targeting remote areas, but there was never enough evidence to pin it down. The officer took me back to town, and later a recovery crew got my SUV. They never found the truck, never found the men. But somewhere out there, in the endless empty desert, they're still driving those old roads, waiting for the next car to come along. And every time I drive through a lonely stretch of highway now, I can't help but glance in the mirror, half expecting to see a dust-covered pickup coming up fast behind me. I don't know why I thought I could make it across that stretch alone. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stupidity, but there's a moment when the sun's high enough and the land's flat enough that everything looks closer than it really is. That's the trap. I had been driving west since dawn, planning to hit a friend's place a few towns over. Gas was low, but I thought I could push it, figured I'd fill up at the next stop. Only the next stop never came. Just dry road, dry sky, and a whole lot of heat warping the horizon. When the fuel light blinked out for good, I coasted onto the shoulder and killed the engine. The silence afterward felt thick, heavy. No cars, no signs of life, only the wind pushing thin ribbons of dust across the cracked asphalt. I popped the trunk, grabbed the water bottle rolling around back there, and started walking east, back toward the last town I'd passed. It couldn't have been more than 15 miles. Long, brutal miles, but doable. Or so I thought. The heat was worse on foot. It wasn't just the sun overhead. It was the way the ground cooked you from below, like standing on a griddle. Every step seemed to squeeze the sweat out of me, faster than I could replace it. The water went quick, first in careful sips, then in desperate mouthfuls. Then it was gone, and I still couldn't see a damn thing ahead of me except the same endless road. It's strange what happens when you get that dehydrated. Your mind starts playing tricks. You think you hear things, engines, voices, anything but the brutal silence that's really there. It was about an hour in when I spotted it. Off the road, maybe 100 yards into the sand. A small, beat-up structure. Concrete, maybe cinder block. Low, flat, sun-bleached like everything else out here. It looked abandoned, but at that point even shade was worth the risk. I cut across the dirt, ignoring the way my boots dragged like weights. As I got closer, I saw the doorway. No door left, just a gaping black square swallowing the sun. Inside, it was dark and cooler, not by much, but enough. There was trash everywhere. Broken beer bottles, old rusted cans, what looked like the burnt remains of a mattress in one corner. And something else, a set of tracks, worn into the dust, too clean to be old, too deliberate to be the random passing of animals. They led into a back room, the doorway sagging slightly to one side. Something about those tracks set my teeth on edge. I didn't follow them. I backed against the nearest wall, trying to stay out of sight from whoever might have made them. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, heart hammering against my ribs, mouth dry as paper, telling myself over and over there was nothing out here, nobody but me. But that feeling, that cold, skin-crawling certainty that I was wrong, kept getting louder in my head. Then I heard it, not from inside the shack, from outside. Footsteps, crunching slow over the dirt and broken glass, moving past the doorway, deliberate, unhurried. I held my breath, pressing myself flatter against the wall. The footsteps paused just outside the entrance, long enough that I could hear the wind whip across the empty desert. I stayed still even when a shadow broke across the doorway, still when it stretched long across the floor toward me. Whoever it was didn't call out, didn't move closer, just stood there, listening. I closed my eyes for a second, willing myself invisible. When I opened them again, the shadow was gone. No footsteps walking away, just gone. I waited another few minutes before I dared move. When I stepped to the doorway and peered out, the landscape was empty again. Nothing but sand, rocks, and the shimmering heat. But I didn't trust it anymore. I left the shack fast, cutting wide, staying low, not back toward the road, deeper into the desert, where low ridges and dry washes might give me cover. I don't know how long I moved like that, crouched low, weaving between boulders and thorny brush, but eventually I climbed a rise and looked back toward the road. There was a vehicle parked next to mine, a beat-up pickup truck, dirt-caked, one door hanging slightly ajar. Someone stood by it, scanning the horizon, not pacing, not shouting, just watching, waiting. It hit me like a punch in the gut then. This wasn't random. Whoever it was had been following me, maybe long before my car even died. I dropped down behind the rocks and stayed there, as long as it took. Hours, maybe. Long enough that the sun dipped low, the heat finally bleeding out of the ground. When the stars came out, I started walking again, heading away from the road, away from the dead car, into the hills where no one could track me easily. I don't know how I made it out. The rescue team found me 3 days later, half dead, raving, my skin scorched raw from the sun, miles off course, dehydrated past the point of reason. When they asked me what happened, I told them the truth, that I got lost, that I was stupid. I didn't tell them about the shack, or the footsteps, or the truck that hadn't been broken down at all. Some things are better left buried out there. In May 2012, 3 of us, Chris, Alan, and me, took a weekend trip into the Mojave Desert. It was Alan's idea. He had found an old article online about abandoned mines scattered through the region, some supposedly dating back to the early 1900s. We weren't professionals, just a group of friends who liked weird places and taking photos. We packed supplies, a couple of flashlights, and Alan brought his drone to get overhead shots. The first 2 mines we visited were exactly what you'd expect. Rotted wooden supports, empty shafts leading into darkness. graffiti sprayed across the walls. They were interesting, but nothing unusual. It was late afternoon when we found the third one. We weren't even sure at first if it was a mine. No signs, no markers, just a battered metal gate standing half open against a low hill. Most people would have missed it if they weren't looking carefully. Inside, the air was stale and cool. The tunnel sloped gently downward, swallowed quickly by shadow. Alan tossed a small rock inside. We waited, heard it clatter onto stone after a few seconds. No weird smells, no weird noises. Seemed safe enough. We clicked on our flashlights and went in. The walls were rough, carved straight out of the rock. And after about 20 feet, the tunnel split into two narrow branches. We stayed together, sticking to the left. The deeper we went, the stranger it got. First were the objects, piles of junk stacked neatly along the sides. Old buckets, coils of wire, broken tools. Nothing weird by itself, but every pile was arranged carefully, almost deliberately. Then we found the chair. It was an old wooden chair, sitting dead center in the tunnel like someone had dragged it there. Dust had built up on the floor around it, except underneath the legs, where the ground was clean, like it had been moved recently. None of us said anything, just a glance between each other. Then we kept walking. We found another split, and then another. The mine was much bigger than it first appeared, and it was clear no one had been maintaining it for decades. The ceilings sagged, and brittle pieces of wood hung loose above our heads. Somewhere deeper inside, we started finding carvings. Not mining markings, not measurements. Symbols, crude, scratched into the walls at random intervals. Circles with slashes through them, stick figures with missing heads. Rows of tally marks that seemed to go on forever. We stopped taking pictures at that point. It didn't feel like something we should be documenting. Alan suggested turning back, but Chris pointed out that we were already pretty deep, and it would be faster to find another exit if the tunnels connected. Reluctantly, we pushed further. The air grew colder, not cooler like underground spaces get cold, sharp enough that you could see your breath. We followed a tunnel that narrowed until we had to move single file. The ground was uneven, and the beams of our flashlights kept catching strange things buried in the dirt. What looked like pieces of fabric, a cracked plastic toy, a rusted key ring. It started feeling less like a mine, and more like something else. When we found the next room, we knew we had made a mistake. It was a cavern, a natural one, opening up without warning. The floor was uneven, and in the center stood a low stone platform, clearly man-made. Around it were shapes bundles wrapped in plastic sheeting and duct tape, arranged in a rough circle. At first, we thought it was garbage. Supplies, maybe. Chris stepped closer, aimed his flashlight, and the light caught something through a tear in the plastic. A human hand, shriveled, grayish, fingers curled inward. We froze. Every muscle locked up at once. There were at least 7 bundles. Maybe more. None of us moved for a long time. We just stood there, the sound of our own breathing filling the dead air. The platform in the center was stained dark. Something had been done there. Something deliberate. Something patient. This wasn't some forgotten relic of mining history. This wasn't kids messing around. This was recent. Very recent. The fear that settled over me in that moment wasn't loud or panicked. It was slow, heavy, sinking into my stomach like lead. We turned back the way we came. No running. No talking. Just steady, quiet steps retracing the tunnels, trying not to make any sound. At one point, we passed another chair. Different from the first. This one was newer, plastic, still upright. A cigarette was crushed into the dirt beside it, the ash barely disturbed. Someone had been sitting there, watching the tunnel we had just walked through. Watching us. We never found the original tunnel we came through. We got lost for hours, looping through identical passages, second-guessing every turn. When we finally stumbled out into the fading evening light, It was like surfacing from underwater. We didn't camp that night. Didn't even talk about it. We drove straight through the night, too afraid to stop, feeling like every headlight behind us might be someone following. None of us ever reported it. We didn't know where exactly we had been. No markers, no names. And honestly, none of us wanted to go back and explain why we had been there in the first place. Sometimes at night, when I'm half asleep, I see flashes of that room. The way the bundles were arranged so neatly. And worse, the feeling that whoever did it hadn't left. They had just stepped away for a moment, long enough for us to walk right in.